The fluorescent lights in the attorney's office buzzed like dying wasps. Elena Martinez sat in a chair that cost more than her monthly rent used to cost, back when she could afford rent, watching her siblings pick through their father's estate like vultures circling roadkill. Her older brother, Richard, leaned back in Italian leather, legs crossed with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never missed a mortgage payment. Her sister, Veronica, examined her manicured nails, diamond wedding ring catching light with each dismissive gesture. And Elena wore a dress from Goodwill that almost matched her shoes, tried to look like someone who belonged in rooms where people divided inheritances instead of counting coins for bus fare. Robert Martinez had died 3 weeks ago. Heart attack at 68. Quick and efficient, which was exactly how he'd lived. For 40 years, he'd worked as an accountant for Westfield Industries, coming home with ink-stained fingers and stories about decimal points that made Elena's childhood simultaneously stable and desperately boring. Attorney Bernard Westlake cleared his throat with the authority of someone who charged $400 an hour to read documents aloud. The will was straightforward, divided with mathematical precision that would have made their father proud. To my son Richard, I leave my investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $180,000. Richard nodded like he'd expected more, but would graciously accept adequacy. To my daughter Veronica, I leave the family home in Westchester, appraised at $240,000. Veronica's expression suggested she'd already mentally redecorated every room and was calculating rental income. And to my daughter Elena sat up straighter, hands gripping her purse with the desperation of someone who needed whatever came next to be enough. Just enough to stop the creditor calls. Enough to get her daughter Mia into the specialist appointments insurance wouldn't cover. Enough to mean she could stop choosing between groceries and utilities. I leave my office filing cabinet, currently located in the study, and all its contents. Silence felt like a guillotine blade. Then Veronica laughed. Actually laughed. The sound sharp and cruel and impossibly loud in the attorney's oak-paneled office. A filing cabinet? He left her a filing cabinet? Richard's mouth twitched into something approximating a smirk. Dad always had a sense of humor. Dark but present. Elena's face burned with humiliation, so acute it felt like physical injury. Her hands shook as she tried to process what she'd just heard. A filing cabinet. Not money. Not property. Not stocks or bonds or anything that could be converted into rent checks or medical bills or food that didn't require choosing between her daughter eating or herself. A filing cabinet full of what? Tax returns from 1987? Receipts for staplers? The organizational musings of a man who color-coded his sock drawer? Attorney Westlake continued reading, his voice professionally neutral in the way that suggested he'd witnessed family implosions too many times to be surprised anymore. Robert included a note regarding the filing cabinet. He pulled out a handwritten letter, her father's careful script marching across the page with characteristic precision. Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I can't be there to explain. The filing cabinet contains everything you need. Trust what you find. Don't dismiss it as worthless just because your siblings will. I love you. I always have, even when I didn't say it enough. Dad. The words hit Elena like stones. Her throat constricted with grief she'd been holding back since the funeral, since watching them lower her father into Pennsylvania earth, while Richard checked his phone and Veronica complained about her shoes getting muddy. Richard stood with the finality of someone concluding unpleasant business. Well, that's settled. Elena, you'll want to collect your filing cabinet before we put the house on the market. Say this weekend? The house isn't going on the market until probate clears. Attorney Westlake interjected. Minimum 60 days. Fine. 2 months then. Veronica was already texting, probably her real estate agent. Elena, get your filing cabinet before we start showing the property. I'm not having potential buyers trip over Dad's office furniture. Elena found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. Can I have a few days to go through it properly? Go through what? Richard's tone dripped condescension. Old tax documents? Take all the time you need. Just remove it before we clean out the house. They left together, Richard and Veronica, already discussing paint colors and market values, and whether granite countertops would improve resale. The attorney's door clicked shut behind them with the sound of Elena's hopes being efficiently filed away. She sat alone in the chair that cost more than her rent, holding her father's note, reading the words over and over like they might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Trust what you find. Attorney Westlake's expression softened fractionally. Ms. Martinez, your father was a careful man. Meticulous. In my 30 years practicing estate law, I learned that when careful people make specific bequests, there's usually a reason. A filing cabinet isn't a bequest. It's a joke. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's exactly what he intended you to have. He stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. I'd suggest examining it thoroughly before you assume it's worthless. Elena walked out of the attorney's office into November Philadelphia afternoon that matched her internal weather, gray, cold, and threatening worse to come. She'd taken the bus here because her car had died 3 weeks before her father did, and the universe apparently enjoyed timing its cruelties for maximum impact. The bus ride back to her apartment took 40 minutes, enough time for Elena to cycle through every emotion available to humans experiencing public transportation while processing family betrayal. Anger at her siblings' casual cruelty, grief at her father's death, shame at her own desperation, fear about what came next when rent was due in 8 days and her bank account contained $43. She'd been a high school math teacher before the layoffs. Good at it, too. Kids actually learned. Test scores improved, parents sent thank you notes. None of which mattered when the school district needed to cut 40 positions and chose to eliminate based on seniority instead of competence. For 2 years, she'd been applying, interviewing, getting rejected with the same polite emails about going in a different direction and impressive credentials, but substitute teaching paid $90 a day when work existed, which wasn't often enough to cover rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in a building where the heat only worked intermittently and the neighbors sold drugs with retail-level efficiency. Her daughter Mia was 12, brilliant, and dealing with type 1 diabetes that required insulin costing $400 monthly even with the assistance program. The math was simple and brutal. Income insufficient, expenses inflexible, trajectory unsustainable. And now her inheritance was a filing cabinet. The apartment greeted her with its usual charm. Peeling wallpaper, mysterious stain on the ceiling that grew during rain, radiator that clanked like it was harboring mechanical grievances. Mia sat at their kitchen table, the one that wobbled because one leg was shorter than the others and Elena had been meaning to fix it for 6 months, but never found time between survival and collapse. Mom! Mia looked up from homework, her face carrying that particular expression of concern that children developed when they understood their parents were drowning but couldn't yet swim well enough to help. Elena forced brightness into her voice with the effort of someone lifting weights beyond their capacity. Hey, sweetie, how was school? Fine. How was the lawyer? No point lying. Mia was 12, not stupid, and had been tracking family dynamics with the analytical precision she'd inherited from her grandfather. Your Uncle Richard got the investment portfolio. Aunt Veronica got the house. I got a filing cabinet. Mia's eyes widened. Like furniture? Exactly like furniture. With files in it. Tax documents, probably. Maybe some receipts from 1992. Very valuable receipts, I'm sure. She tried to make it funny, but her voice cracked on the last word. Mia stood, crossed their tiny kitchen, and hugged her mother with the fierce protectiveness of kids who'd learned too young that adults weren't infallible. Grandpa was weird about his office. Remember? He never let anyone touch anything. Elena did remember. Her father's study had been sacred space, organized with precision that bordered on obsessive. Everything labeled, color-coded, filed with the systematic dedication of someone who believed chaos could be prevented through proper alphabetization. Maybe there's something important in it, Mia suggested with the optimism of someone who still believed the universe occasionally distributed fairness. Maybe. Elena didn't believe it, but she appreciated her daughter's faith. That Saturday, Elena borrowed her neighbor's truck, a 1997 Ford Ranger held together by duct tape and aggressive optimism. and drove to her father's house in Westchester. The neighborhood looked exactly as it had throughout her childhood. Neat lawns, American flags, houses that cost what teachers made in 3 years if they were very lucky, and worked without sleeping. Richard's Tesla sat in the driveway like a statement about success. Veronica's Mercedes was parked behind it, blocking access with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never considered other people might need space. Elena rang the doorbell, her own childhood home, and she was ringing the doorbell, and waited while footsteps approached with the efficiency of someone interrupted during important work. Veronica opened the door wearing yoga pants that cost more than Elena's monthly grocery budget. "Oh, you're here for the filing cabinet." Not "Hi, Elena." Not "How are you holding up?" Just acknowledgement of the furniture transaction. Dad's note said to come get it. It's in the study. Richard's cataloging the house contents for estate purposes, so try not to disturb anything. Elena stepped into the house where she'd grown up, where she'd learned multiplication tables at the kitchen table and celebrated Christmas mornings and cried over her first heartbreak. It smelled the same, lemon polish and old books, and the particular scent of a man who wore the same aftershave for 40 years. Richard appeared from the study, holding an inventory clipboard. "Elena, good timing. We need the room cleared by next week for staging." "Staging?" Her voice came out sharper than intended. "Dad's been dead 3 weeks. And the market's hot right now. Waiting costs money." He gestured toward the study like a museum guide, indicating unremarkable exhibits. "Filing cabinets, all yours. You'll need help moving it. Thing weighs a ton." The study looked exactly as Elena remembered. Dark wood desk, leather chair worn smooth by decades of use, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with accounting textbooks and mystery novels her father had read methodically, one per week, every week, for as long as she could remember. And there, in the corner, the filing cabinet. It was massive, 5 feet tall, gunmetal gray, commercial grade with 4 drawers and a lock system that looked like it could withstand nuclear assault. The kind of filing cabinet government agencies use for classified documents, not suburban accountants storing personal paperwork. Elena approached it slowly, running her hand over the cold metal surface. A label on the top drawer read, "Financial Records 1980 to 1990, in her father's precise handwriting. The second drawer, Tax Documents 1991 to 2000. Third, Personal Correspondence. Fourth, Miscellaneous." Richard appeared behind her. "See? Exactly what it looks like. Old paperwork. You're welcome to shred it all, or whatever. Just get out of here." Something in his tone bothered Elena. Too dismissive. Too eager to see her take it and leave. Like he wanted her gone before she looked too carefully. "Did you go through it?" "Why would I? It's labeled. Tax documents, financial records, nothing valuable. Just Dad being Dad, keeping every receipt since the Reagan administration." But his eyes shifted slightly when he said it. A tell Elena recognized from years of teaching teenagers who claimed they'd definitely done their homework, but actually hadn't. "I'll take it today." "Good. Need help loading?" "I've got it." She didn't have it. The filing cabinet weighed approximately what a small car weighed. But accepting help from Richard felt like admitting weakness, and Elena was done being weak in front of her siblings. Veronica appeared with coffee, expensive kind from the machine their father had never used because he'd been a Maxwell houseman until the day he died. "You know, Elena, if you need money, you could just ask. Richard and I could probably help." The offer landed with all the warmth of a business transaction. Charity disguised as family concern, delivered with the unspoken expectation of gratitude that would last forever. "I'm fine." The lie tasted like pennies. "Just came for what Dad left me." It took 40 minutes and significant back injury risk to maneuver the filing cabinet down the hallway, across the porch, and into the borrowed truck bed. Richard supervised from the doorway, offering suggestions instead of muscle. Veronica watched from the window, probably calculating how much the hardwood floors would cost to refinish after Elena scratched them with heavy furniture. Finally, secured with rope that looked optimistic about its load-bearing capacity, the filing cabinet sat in the truck bed, looking exactly like what it was, a monument to poor inheritance distribution and family dysfunction. "Richard, approached as Elena climbed into the driver's seat. "Look, about the will, don't." She cut him off with the sharpness of someone who'd spent 3 weeks preparing for this conversation and had decided silence was safer than honesty. "Just don't." Dad was old. He wasn't thinking clearly. "If you want to contest, I don't want anything from you." Not true. She wanted the house, wanted the portfolio, wanted the inheritance that could solve her problems instead of adding to them. But admitting that gave Richard power, she refused to surrender. She drove away, watching her childhood home shrink in the rearview mirror, Veronica and Richard already back inside, probably discussing paint colors and how quickly they could erase their father's existence from rooms that had held his entire life. The apartment building's elevator was broken, which meant carrying the filing cabinet up 3 flights of stairs. Elena enlisted Mia and their neighbor Marcus, a 19-year-old who worked nights at Target and had shoulders suggesting he lifted more than boxes. Together, they muscled the filing cabinet upstairs that protested each step. By the time they wrestled it into Elena's apartment, she was sweating despite November's chill, her back screaming, and her patience with the universe exhausted. Marcus left after she thanked him with the $10 she couldn't afford to give, but did anyway, because kindness cost. Mia circled the filing cabinet like it was a puzzle requiring specific approach angles. "It's really locked." She pulled at the top drawer, which didn't budge. Like serious locks. All 4 drawers featured individual key locks, industrial-grade mechanisms that suggested her father had been very concerned about unauthorized access to his tax documents from 1987. "Did Grandpa give you a key?" Elena checked her purse, her pockets, the envelope containing his note. Nothing. Just a letter telling her to trust what she found, which was spectacularly unhelpful when what she found was locked behind mechanisms requiring keys that apparently didn't exist. Maybe he hid it somewhere. Mia started examining the cabinet's exterior with 12-year-old determination. People hide keys in weird places. I saw it on TV. They searched. Top, sides, back panel underneath. Nothing. Elena sat back on her heels, frustration crystallizing into anger that had nowhere safe to land. "This is ridiculous. He leaves me a locked filing cabinet with no key. What am I supposed to do? Hire a locksmith." "Can you afford a locksmith?" "No." The word came out harsher than intended. "No, I can't afford a locksmith. I can't afford anything. This was supposed to... I don't know what it was supposed to be, but not this." Mia sat beside her mother on the apartment floor, both of them staring at the filing cabinet like it might spontaneously explain itself. Outside, evening traffic hummed. Somewhere above them, neighbors argued in Spanish about someone named Carlos who apparently couldn't be trusted with the rent money. Normal sounds of people living normal lives with normal problems that didn't include inheriting furniture. "Mom, you okay?" Elena wasn't okay. She was tired. Bone tired. Soul tired. The kind of tired that came from 2 years of fighting systems designed to keep people like her exactly where they were, struggling, desperate, one emergency away from catastrophe. Her father's death had felt like potential salvation. Not because she wanted him dead. God, she'd loved him, even when he was distant and weird and impossible to understand. But because inheritance meant possibility, meant maybe, finally, she could stop drowning and start swimming. And instead, she got a locked filing cabinet. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Let's make dinner." Dinner was pasta with sauce from a jar, garlic bread made from hot dog buns, because she'd forgotten to buy actual bread, and the pretense that everything was normal while Elena's mind spiraled through worst-case scenarios. Rent due in 6 days, $850. Current bank balance, $43. Mia's insulin prescription needed refilling, $400 even with assistance. Groceries, whatever was left after everything else, which was usually nothing. She'd been applying for jobs daily. Teaching positions, administrative work, retail management, anything that paid more than substitute teaching's inconsistent $90 per day. Every application disappeared into digital voids, occasionally returning automated rejections that might as well have said, "You're not good enough, and we're not even going to pretend we read your resume." After Mia went to bed, Elena sat on the floor beside the filing cabinet and read her father's note for the 100th time. "Trust what you find. Don't dismiss it as worthless just because your siblings will. Her father had been meticulous, careful. He'd spent 40 years organizing information with systematic precision. If he'd locked this cabinet, there was a reason. If he'd left it specifically to her, there was purpose. She just needed to find the key. Sunday morning arrived with Elena's back muscles staging a formal protest about furniture moving. She took 2 ibuprofen with coffee that tasted like regret and started searching her father's note for hidden meaning. The letter was handwritten on his personal stationery, cream-colored paper, his initials embossed at the top. She held it up to light, looking for watermarks or hidden messages. Nothing, just his careful script. Trust what you find. What you find, not what you inherit, not what you receive. What you find. Mia appeared in pajamas featuring cartoon cats doing science. Did you solve it? I'm working on it. Can I help? They examined the letter together, Mia's young eyes possibly catching details Elena's exhausted brain missed. Her daughter pointed to small imperfections in the handwriting, slight variations in pressure, tiny marks that might have been intentional or might have been a natural artifact of a man in his late 60s whose hands weren't as steady as they'd once been. Mom, look, these letters are darker. Mia traced her finger under specific words. Trust, find, cabinet, love. Elena looked closer. She was right. Those 4 words showed slightly more pressure, as if her father had pressed harder on specific letters while writing. What if it's a code? Mia's excitement built with the momentum of discovery. Like, the first letters spell something? Trust, T, find, F, cabinet, C, love, L, TFCL, which meant nothing. Or maybe all the darker words together mean something? Trust what you find in the cabinet reveals love. Closer, but still cryptic to the point of uselessness. Elena's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered automatically and immediately regretted it. Ms. Martinez? This is Jennifer from Westside Credit Services regarding your outstanding balance of $2,347. We've been attempting to reach you. Elena hung up. The creditors had been calling for 6 months. She'd been ignoring them for 5.5 months because talking to people about money she didn't have felt like. Productive use of time she also didn't have. Mia watched with the careful expression of kids who understood their parents were in trouble but couldn't help. Was that about bills? Just a wrong number. Another lie. Elena was collecting them like receipts, building her own filing cabinet of small untruths designed to protect her daughter from reality's sharper edges. That afternoon, Elena called Richard. It physically hurt to dial his number, but desperation made people flexible about pride. Did Dad give you anything else? Like keys or documents, or Elena, I got the portfolio. Veronica got the house. You got the filing cabinet. That's what the wolf said. If you're calling to contest, I'm not contesting anything. I just need to know if Dad mentioned keys. For the cabinet. Why would he give me keys to your filing cabinet? Check his desk. Check his nightstand. I don't know. We cleaned out most of his personal effects already. You what? The house needs to be market ready. We couldn't leave it full of Dad's old stuff. Goodwill took most of it. Some went to the dump. If you wanted anything specific, you should have said something at the lawyer's office. Her father's belongings, disposed of like trash. Decades of life reduced to Goodwill donations and landfill contributions because Richard needed the house market ready. Did you keep anything? Elena's voice came out tight with barely controlled rage. His watch. Some cufflinks. Veronica took jewelry for sentimental reasons. Why? You want his old reading glasses? I want to know where the filing cabinet keys are. Then check the filing cabinet. Richard's patience audibly thinned. Look, I have actual work to do. If you need a locksmith, that's your problem. Don't call me again about this. The line went dead. Elena threw her phone onto the couch with enough force that it bounced twice. Mia appeared from her bedroom with the careful approach of someone navigating emotional landmines. Uncle Richard's being a jerk. Language. But he is, though. Yeah, he is. They sat together on the couch that had come with the apartment and probably hosted generations of previous tenants' problems. The filing cabinet stood in the corner like a monument to everything wrong with Elena's life. Locked, unhelpful, taking up space she didn't have for furniture she didn't want. Mom? What the keys inside? Elena looked at her daughter. That doesn't make sense. How we get to the key if it's locked inside the thing we need the key to open? I don't know, but Grandpa was weird. Remember how he used to hide Mom's birthday presents inside other presents? Like, one year he gave you a book, but inside the book was a gift card, and behind the gift card was a note about where the real present was? She did remember. Her father's idea of gift-giving had been elaborate treasure hunts requiring multiple steps and occasional math problems. Elena had thought it was annoying as a teenager. Now it felt like his particular way of showing love, complicated, intellectual, requiring effort to understand. So you think the key's hidden somewhere in or on the cabinet itself? It's what Grandpa would do. They resumed searching with renewed focus. Elena checked every surface, every seam, every screw. The back panel showed no irregularities. The sides were smooth metal. The bottom showed slight scratches, as if something had been attached and removed. Elena tilted the cabinet forward with Mia's help, examining the underside with her phone's flashlight. There, a small envelope, taped to the bottom, manila paper gone brittle with age. Her hand shook as she peeled it free. Inside, a single key attached to a tag in her father's handwriting. Start with the bottom drawer. Work your way up. I'm sorry I couldn't explain in person. I love you, Dad. Mia squealed with excitement. I knew it. I totally knew it. Elena held the key, feeling its weight, understanding that whatever came next would either save her or represent her father's final disappointment, leaving her something useless disguised as meaningful. The bottom drawer's lock turned smoothly, mechanism well-maintained despite years of disuse. She pulled it open slowly, half expecting tax documents or personal letters or any of the mundane contents a filing cabinet normally held. Instead, she found files, dozens of them, each one labeled with dates spanning from 1985 to last month. Each one containing documents that made Elena's heart start pounding with something between hope and disbelief. Bank statements. Not her father's personal accounts. Corporate accounts for Westfield Industries, the company where he'd worked for 40 years. Detailed transaction records showing systematic irregularities. Money moved between accounts in patterns that looked designed to avoid detection. Mia peered over her shoulder. Mom? What is all this? Elena pulled out another file. This one contained copies of internal memos discussing accounting discrepancies. Her father's handwriting filled the margins with notes, dates, calculations showing where money should have gone versus where it actually went. A third file held correspondence between her father and the company's CFO, Marcus Westfield Jr., discussing creative accounting strategies that were definitely not legal. A fourth file contained printed emails, hundreds of them, documenting a systematic embezzlement scheme spanning 2 decades. Elena sat back on her heels, the implications crashing into her like sequential car accidents. Her father hadn't just been an accountant. He'd been a witness, a documentarian. He'd spent 40 years building an evidence file of corporate fraud, keeping meticulous records of crimes committed by the company that employed him. This is evidence, she whispered. This is massive evidence. Evidence of what? Crimes. Big ones. Corporate embezzlement, fraud, maybe more. Dad documented everything. But why? Why spend 40 years collecting evidence without reporting it? Why keep silent about crimes he clearly knew were happening? She pulled out another file from the bottom drawer. This one was different, thicker, more recent. The label read, Insurance Policy. For Elena. Open only if I'm gone. Inside, a typed letter on her father's personal stationery, dated 3 months before his death. Elena, if you're reading this, I'm dead. I'm sorry. I should have explained years ago, but fear kept me silent. For 40 years, I documented corporate fraud at Westfield Industries. The family who owns the company has been systematically stealing from shareholders, employees, and the government. Millions of dollars. Maybe tens of millions. I didn't report it because they threatened your mother. Said if I ever went public, she'd have an accident. I was young, scared, and believed them. After your mother died, They threatened you and your siblings. Said children could disappear. Said accidents happened. So I stayed quiet. I collected evidence. I built a case that would destroy them, and I kept it locked in my filing cabinet where they couldn't find it even though they looked. They searched my office 3 times over the years. Never thought to check the furniture. This evidence is worth money. Whistleblower protection laws mean you can report this to the SEC and receive a percentage of recovered funds, between 10 to 30%, depending on the case. If the fraud is as extensive as I believe, that could be millions. But it's also dangerous. The Westfield family has connections. Money. Lawyers. They will fight. They will threaten. They may do worse. I couldn't fight them while I was alive. But you can fight them now that I'm dead. You're braver than I ever was. Smarter. Better. Use this evidence however you see fit. Report it. Burn it. I trust your judgment. Just know that whatever you choose, I left you this because I knew you'd need it. Because I failed to provide for you in life and wanted to give you something meaningful in death. I'm sorry I was distant. I'm sorry I couldn't be the father you deserved. I was scared. I'm not anymore. I love you. I always have. Dad. Elena read the letter 3 times. Her hands shook so badly she had to set the paper down. Her father hadn't been distant because he didn't care. He'd been distant because he was terrified, living under threats for 40 years, protecting his family the only way he knew how, through silence and meticulous documentation. And now he'd given her the weapon to fight back. Evidence that could bring down a powerful family. Evidence worth millions in whistleblower rewards. Evidence that came with danger her father had spent 4 decades trying to protect her from. Mia's voice came out small. Mom, are you crying? She was, tears streaming down her face, grief and rage and understanding all tangled together into something she couldn't separate into component emotions. Grandpa was protecting us. The whole time. I thought he was just quiet, but he was protecting us. She pulled Mia into a hug, holding her daughter while her mind raced through implications. The filing cabinet contained evidence of massive fraud. Her father had documented everything with his characteristic precision. Transaction records, emails, internal memos, calculations showing exactly how much money had been stolen and where it had gone. This wasn't an inheritance. This was a nuclear weapon disguised as furniture, and Elena had to decide whether to use it. The remaining drawers contained more files. Years of evidence, organized chronologically, labeled with the same meticulous care her father had applied to everything. Transaction record from 1985 showing the fraud's beginning, small amounts, testing whether anyone would notice. By 1990, the amounts had grown exponentially. By 2000, the Westfield family was stealing millions annually. By 2020, the scheme had evolved into sophisticated corporate shell games moving money through offshore accounts and fabricated expenses. The third drawer held what her father called the smoking gun, internal emails from Marcus Westfield Jr. explicitly discussing how to hide stolen funds from auditors, how to falsify tax documents, how to structure transactions to avoid federal reporting requirements. The second drawer contained evidence of witness intimidation. Her father had documented conversations where Westfield executives threatened employees who asked too many questions. 3 former accountants had resigned under mysterious circumstances. One died in a car accident that police ruled accidental, but her father's notes suggested otherwise. The top drawer held her father's personal journal, entries spanning 4 decades. Elena opened it to a random page, dated July 1992. Marcus Jr. came to my office today, said he knew I'd been keeping records, said if I ever spoke about what I knew, Elena would be next. She's 10 years old. She wants to be a mathematician. She deserves to grow up. I agreed to stay silent. God forgive me, I agreed. Another entry, November 2005. Elena graduated college today. Mathematics degree. I'm so proud. Couldn't tell her why I seemed distracted during the ceremony. Marcus Sr. was there. Reminded me that my family's safety depends on my continued discretion. Some days I hate myself for being a coward. Most days I'm just grateful my children are alive. Final entry, August 2024, 3 months before his death. Heart acting up. Doctor says it's serious. Time to stop being a coward. Can't report this myself. They'd kill me before it went public. But Elena's smart. Brave. She'll know what to do with the evidence. She'll make this right. I'm sorry I failed you, Elena. This is my last chance to give you something worth having. Use it well. Elena closed the journal. Her face wet with tears, she didn't remember starting to cry. Her father had lived in fear for 40 years. Had sacrificed his relationship with his children to keep them safe. Had died knowing he'd failed to give them the life they deserved, but hoping his evidence could provide what his presence couldn't. And he'd left it to her specifically. Not Richard with his MBA and corporate connections. Not Veronica with her lawyer husband and society friends. Her, the struggling math teacher with $43 in her bank account and medical bills she couldn't pay. Because he knew she'd fight. Because he knew she'd understand what this evidence meant. Because he'd watch her refuse to give up, even when giving up would have been easier. Mia touched her arm gently. Mom, what do we do? Good question. Perfect question. The question that would determine everything that came next. Elena could report this to the SEC. Her father's letter said whistleblower protections meant she'd receive 10 to 30% of recovered funds. If the fraud totaled tens of millions, and the evidence suggested it might total hundreds of millions, her share could be life-changing. Could be enough to pay off medical bills, student loans, credit cards. Enough for an apartment that didn't smell like mildew. Enough for me as insulin without choosing between medicine and groceries. Enough to stop drowning. But whistleblower cases took years. The Westfield family would fight with lawyers and money and connections her father had spent 4 decades being afraid of. And Elena would be alone. A single mother with no resources fighting a corporate empire built on fraud and protected by people who'd already proven they'd threaten children. Her father had said it was dangerous. Had documented witness intimidation, unexplained deaths, threats against family members. Was she really brave enough to fight? Or would her father's sacrifice be wasted because his daughter was as scared as he'd been? Elena looked at the filing cabinet, at the evidence representing 40 years of silent resistance, at her father's journal documenting daily choices between courage and survival, at the letters saying she was braver than he'd been, even though. She didn't feel brave. She felt terrified. But maybe bravery wasn't the absence of fear. Maybe it was choosing to fight despite being scared. Maybe it was her father's voice in her head saying, use this evidence, combined with Mia's face looking up at her with trust Elena didn't deserve but desperately wanted to earn. She pulled out her phone and started researching SEC whistleblower procedures. Started reading about protection laws, about reward structures, about how long cases typically took and what kind of evidence prosecutors needed. The filing cabinet sat beside her, for drawers full of her father's lifetime work. His insurance policy, his final gift, his last attempt to protect the daughter he'd loved but couldn't save while alive. Elena read case studies until midnight. Read about whistleblowers who'd won millions. Read about whistleblowers who'd lost everything fighting corporations with unlimited resources. Read about the process, filing complaints, SEC investigations, legal battles that lasted years. One case caught her attention. Susan Chun versus pharmaceutical giant. Evidence of fraud, 7 years of legal fighting. Final settlement for $80 million, of which Susan received $24 million as her whistleblower reward. $24 million. Elena tried to comprehend that number. Tried to imagine what $24 million could buy. Not just rent and insulin. Not just groceries and utilities. Freedom. Security. Mia's college education. Medical care without choosing who got to be healthy. A life where survival wasn't the only goal. But Susan Chen's case had also documented death threats, attempted break-ins, harassment campaigns, legal fees that nearly bankrupted her before the settlement came through. 7 years of hell before vindication. Could Elena survive 7 years of fighting? Did she have a choice? Her phone buzzed. Text from her landlord. Rent due Friday. No extensions this month. Friday was 4 days away. She had $43. Rent was $850. The filing cabinet contained evidence worth potentially millions. But millions took time to materialize, and rent came due on Friday regardless of future possibilities. Elena needed a plan, not just for reporting the fraud, but for surviving the next 4 days. The next 4 weeks. The gap between having evidence and having money. Monday morning, Elena called in sick to the substitute teaching system. She couldn't focus on algebra when her entire life balanced on decisions she wasn't qualified to make. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by her father's files, trying to understand corporate fraud with a mathematician's brain trained for theorems, not larceny. Mia had gone to school with instructions to text if anything felt wrong. Low blood sugar, high blood sugar, any of the dozen warning signs that meant type 1 diabetes was staging a rebellion. Elena's phone sat beside her, silent for now, while she read documents that transformed her understanding of her father's entire life. The fraud was elegant in its complexity. Westfield Industries manufactured industrial equipment. Nothing glamorous, just the machinery that made other machinery. Boring. Profitable. Perfect for hiding theft in plain sight. Marcus Westfield Sr. had founded the company in 1960. When he died in 1995, his son Marcus Jr. took over and apparently decided that legitimate profit wasn't sufficient. The scheme her father documented started small. Fake vendor invoices for equipment that didn't exist. Inflated prices for materials actually purchased at lower costs. The difference went into shell companies controlled by the Westfield family. By 2000, they'd evolved to offshore subsidiaries that existed only on paper, consulting fees paid to entities that performed no services, and creative accounting that made stolen money look like legitimate business expenses. Her father's notes estimated total theft at $334 million over 40 years. Elena stared at that number until it stopped looking like mathematics and started looking like her father's entire career spent documenting crimes he couldn't report without endangering his family. $334 million. If she reported this and the SEC recovered even half that amount, and if she received the minimum 10% whistleblower award, she'd get $16. $7 million. The number was incomprehensible. Elena had never had more than $3,000 in her bank account at once, had never owned property or investments or anything that appreciated in value. Her net worth was currently negative if you counted student loans and credit card debt. And here sat evidence that could make her a multimillionaire, if she was brave enough to use it, if the Westfield family didn't destroy her first, if the case succeeded, if. Her phone rang. Unknown number again. Elena answered without thinking and immediately regretted it. Ms. Martinez, this is David Chun from the SEC's whistleblower office. I received an interesting email from you this morning regarding Westfield Industries. Elena's stomach dropped. She hadn't sent any email, hadn't contacted anyone, unless she looked at her laptop, still open to the SEC whistleblower webpage from last night's research. The form she'd been reading about, not filling out, except the cursor sat in the submit field and her email address was populated in the contact information section. Mia, her 12-year-old daughter, had apparently decided to help by submitting a whistleblower complaint while Elena slept. Ah yes, I have documentation of corporate fraud at Westfield Industries. Professional calm settled over her voice with the autopilot of someone who'd spent years teaching teenagers while hiding panic about unpaid bills. Teachers got very good at sounding confident while dying inside. Chen's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd heard 1,000 fraud claims and learned not to get excited until seeing actual evidence. What kind of documentation? 40 years of financial records, transaction logs, internal emails discussing how to hide stolen money, corporate memos about witness intimidation. My father was their chief accountant. He documented everything. Silence on the line. Then Chen's tone shifted, became sharper, more focused. Everything, bank statements, vendor invoices, offshore account transfers, emails from executives explicitly discussing fraud. It's organized chronologically, for filing drawers full. Ms. Martinez, I'm going to need to see this documentation. How soon can you bring it to our Philadelphia office? I don't have a car. The admission felt humiliating, but lying would be worse. And the filing cabinet weighs about 300 pounds. I can photograph documents, or scan them, or don't photograph anything. Don't scan anything. Don't send anything electronically. This is potential evidence in a federal investigation. Chain of custody matters. He paused, and Elena heard keyboard clicks. I can send agents to collect the physical files. Are you home today? Agents. Federal agents. Coming. To her apartment. Yes, I'm home. Give me your address. Someone will be there this afternoon. In the meantime, don't discuss this with anyone. Don't touch the files more than necessary. Don't contact Westfield Industries or anyone connected to them. Elena provided her address, hung up, and sat staring at her phone like it had transformed into a snake. Federal agents were coming to her apartment today because her 12-year-old daughter had submitted a whistleblower complaint about $334 million in corporate fraud. This was happening, actually happening. No more theoretical decisions about whether to fight. Mia had decided for her, and now the machinery of federal investigation was grinding into motion whether Elena was ready or not. She called Mia's school, left a message saying there was a family emergency and she'd be picking her daughter up early. Then she frantically cleaned the apartment, not because federal agents care about dust, but because doing something with her hands kept her brain from spiraling into panic. The agents arrived at 2 p.m. in a black SUV that screamed federal government. Two of them, Chun, who'd called earlier, Asian American, late 30s, wearing a suit that suggested government salary, and his partner, a black woman who introduced herself as Agent Victoria Williams, early 40s, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times and wasn't impressed by much. Elena let them in, hyper-aware of how small her apartment looked, how the radiator was clanking again, how the stain on the ceiling had definitely grown since yesterday. Chen's eyes went immediately to the filing cabinet. Is this it? Yes. Bottom drawer first. My father left instructions to work from bottom to top. Williams pulled on latex gloves and opened the bottom drawer carefully, extracting files with the precision of someone handling evidence that would eventually end up in court. She flipped through the first file, 1,985 transaction records, and her eyebrows rose fractionally. This is organized. My father was meticulous. That's an understatement. Chen was photographing the drawer's contents with a professional camera. Most whistleblower cases give us scraps. Partial records, fragmented evidence. He looked at Elena. This is a prosecutor's dream. Williams pulled out the file labeled smoking gun and read the first email. Her expression remained neutral, but something in her posture changed, became more alert. Ms. Martinez, did your father work alone on this documentation? Yes. He didn't trust anyone else. The Westfield family threatened him. Threatened us. He spent 40 years too scared to report it. But he told you about it? No. He died 3 weeks ago. Left me the filing cabinet in his will. I found the evidence this weekend. Chun and Williams exchanged glances that communicated something Elena couldn't interpret. Williams set down the file carefully. Ms. Martinez, I need to ask you something. I need you to answer honestly. Has anyone from Westfield Industries contacted you recently? Asked about your father's belongings? Expressed interest in anything he left behind? Elena thought back to the estate meeting. Richard and Veronica's casual dismissal of the filing cabinet. Their eagerness to get it out of the house. Richard's insistence that it was just old paperwork. My brother got my father's investment portfolio. My sister got his house. They thought the filing cabinet was worthless. They wanted me to remove it quickly so they could stage the house for sale. Did they try to examine it? My brother said he didn't bother. It was labeled as tax documents and financial records. He assumed it was personal paperwork. Williams pulled out her phone, typed something. What are your siblings' names? Richard Martinez and Veronica Morrison. Why? Just collecting information. How much do they know about the filing cabinet's contents? Nothing. I found the key yesterday. Opened it last night. The only other person who knows is my daughter, and she's the one who submitted the whistleblower complaint without telling me. Chen almost smiled. Your daughter submitted the complaint? She's 12. She thought she was helping. I've been researching the process, fell asleep with the website open. She must have filled out the form. Resourceful kid. Williams was still typing on her phone. Ms. Martinez, we're going to take the filing cabinet into federal custody. You'll receive a receipt for the evidence. The SEC will begin an investigation, which typically takes 12 to 18 months. If charges are filed and the government recovers funds, you'll be eligible for a whistleblower reward of 10 to 30% of recovered amounts. How long until I receive any money? Williams' expression softened slightly. These cases take years, 2 to 5 on average, sometimes longer if the defendants fight. You won't see money quickly. Elena's heart sank. Years. She had 4 days until rent was due and $43 in her bank account. A whistleblower reward worth millions was useless if she was homeless before the investigation concluded. She must have seen something in her expression. Are you in immediate financial difficulty? I'm a substitute teacher. I have a daughter with type 1 diabetes. My father died 3 weeks ago. So yes, you could say I'm in immediate financial difficulty. The SEC has a hardship fund for whistleblowers in active cases. It's not much, usually $5,000 to $10,000, but can help with immediate expenses while the investigation proceeds. $10,000. Enough for rent, insulin, groceries. Enough to breathe for a few months. Not life-changing, but life-sustaining. How do I apply? I'll send you the forms. Processing takes about 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Rent was due in 4 days. The hardship fund was useless for immediate survival. Williams and Shun spent 2 hours carefully removing files from the cabinet, photographing each drawer's contents, documenting chain of custody with forms Elena signed without reading carefully. By 4 p.m., they'd loaded the filing cabinet into their SUV, leaving Elena with a receipt for evidentiary materials related to potential securities fraud and business cards instructing her to call if anyone from Westfield Industries contacted her. After they left, the apartment felt emptier. The filing cabinet's absence left a rectangle of clean floor where dust hadn't accumulated, a ghost outline of her father's final gift. Mia came home at 4:30, let herself in with her key, and immediately knew something had happened. Did the government come? Yes. They took the filing cabinet. Because you submitted a whistleblower complaint without asking me. Mia's face fell. I'm sorry. I thought I was helping. You were researching it, and you seemed scared to actually do it, so I thought, you thought you'd make the decision for me. Are you mad? Elena wanted to be mad. Wanted a lecture about boundaries and consequences and how 12-year-olds shouldn't submit federal complaints about corporate fraud without parental permission. But Mia had done what Elena had been too scared to do. Had pushed them past the paralysis of fear into action that couldn't be reversed. I'm not mad. I'm terrified. But you did the right thing. Grandpa left us this evidence for a reason. We couldn't just ignore it. So what happens now? Now the SEC investigates. Could take years. Eventually, if they prove fraud, we get money. A lot of money. How much? Maybe millions. But not for a long time. And in the meantime, rent's due Friday, and I have $43. Mia pulled out her piggy bank, a ceramic dolphin she'd been filling with allowance and birthday money for 3 years. She dumped it on the table. Bills and coins scattered across the surface. I have $127. We can use it. Elena's throat constricted. Her 12-year-old daughter offering her entire savings to help with rent. The generosity was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. Baby, I can't take your money. Why not? We're a team. Teams share resources. That's what Grandpa's evidence is about, right? Sharing what we have to make things better. The logic was flawed, but the sentiment was perfect. Elena pulled Mia into a hug that lasted longer than necessary, because sometimes mothers needed comfort more than children did. Thank you. We'll use it if we have to. But let me try some other things first. That evening, Elena made a list of assets she could liquidate. Her laptop, maybe $200 if she sold it locally. Her TV, another $100. Jewelry she'd inherited from her mother. Sentimental value, but probably $300 if she found the right pawn shop. Her phone, necessary for job interviews and emergencies, couldn't sell. Total potential cash, $600. Enough for most of the rent if she combined it with Mia's $127 and her own $43. They'd have nothing left, but they'd have housing for another month. She posted the laptop and TV on Facebook Marketplace with prices slightly below market value, hoping for quick sales. Within an hour, 3 people had messaged about the laptop. One offered to meet that night with cash. At 7 p.m., Elena met Marcus. Different Marcus, not her neighbor, a college student with cash and interest in a laptop for his girlfriend. They met in a coffee shop parking lot because meeting strangers for transactions required public spaces and paranoia. He handed her $200 in 20s. She gave him the laptop that had been her connection to job applications and research in the modern world. Watched him drive away with technology she couldn't afford to replace. Back home, she counted the money 3 times like repetition would make it multiply. $243 total now. Rent was $850. She was $607 short with 3 days to Miracle Manufacturing. Her phone rang. Agent Chun. Ms. Martinez, I wanted to give you a heads up. We've begun preliminary investigation of Westfield Industries. Standard procedure is to notify the company that they're under investigation. That notification went out an hour ago. Elena's stomach dropped. They know someone reported them. They know the SEC is investigating allegations of securities fraud. They don't know who filed the complaint or what evidence we have. Whistleblower identity is protected. But they'll guess it was my father. He was their chief accountant for 40 years. If anyone had evidence, your father is deceased. Deceased people don't file SEC complaints. If Westfield suspects anything, they'll investigate possible sources among current employees or recent departures. You weren't employed by them. You have no obvious connection to their internal operations. Except my father worked there for 4 decades and just died, which makes you seem like a bereaved daughter inheriting her father's effects, not a whistleblower with evidence. Ms. Martinez, the SEC takes whistleblower protection seriously. Your identity is confidential. We won't disclose it without your permission or a court order. After he hung up, Elena sat in her apartment trying to believe that her identity was protected, trying to ignore the voice in her head, the voice that sounded like her father's journal entries, saying that the Westfield family had connections, resources, and 40 years of experience making problems disappear. She was being paranoid. The SEC had protocols, legal protections, federal agents who knew what they were doing. But her father had also believed he was protected by staying silent, and fear had poisoned 40 years of his life. Elena couldn't live like that. Wouldn't let fear transform her into a ghost like her father had been, present but absent, alive but not living. She needed money. Needed it now. The whistleblower reward was years away, and rent came due Friday regardless of federal investigation timelines. Tuesday morning, Elena called her landlord. Mr. Kowalski was 60-something, Polish accent still thick after 30 years in Philadelphia. Owner of a 3-unit building that probably violated housing codes in ways Elena had learned not to examine too closely. Mr. Kowalski, it's Elena Martinez in 3B. I need to talk about Friday's rent. You have rent. His tone suggested he already knew the answer. I have $243. I'm short $607. Can I pay partial now and the rest in 2 weeks when I get paid for substitute teaching? You were short last month and month before. I gave you extensions twice already. I know, and I appreciate it. But my father just died, and the estate is complicated, and I'm waiting on money that's coming but not here yet. I have bills too, Elena. Mortgage on building. Repairs. I can't keep giving extensions. 2 weeks. That's all I'm asking. 2 weeks, and I'll have the full amount. She had no idea if that was true. Substitute teaching assignments were unpredictable, but desperation made liars of honest people. Mr. Kowalski sighed with the weariness of landlords who'd heard every excuse. I have someone interested in 3B. Professional couple. No kids. They can pay first, last, and security immediately. The words hit like ice water. He was threatening eviction. Actually threatening it. Mr. Kowalski, please. I have a daughter. She has diabetes. We can't be homeless. Then pay your rent. Friday. Full amount. Or, I start eviction proceedings Monday. The line went dead. Elena sat holding the phone, feeling the walls of her apartment press in. Friday was 3 days away. She had $243. Needed $607 more. Had sold everything she could sell except sentimental items she couldn't bear to part with. Her mother's wedding ring sat in the jewelry box on her dresser. White gold, small diamond, appraised at $400 when her mother died 5 years ago. Probably worth $500 now if she found the right buyer. Elena pulled it out, held it up to the light. Remembered her mother wearing it every day for 30 years. Remembered her father touching it gently at the funeral, silent tears tracking down his face. This was the last piece of her mother she had. The last physical connection to a woman who'd been kind and patient and had died from cancer that insurance wouldn't fully cover, leaving medical bills that had contributed to Elena's current financial catastrophe. She couldn't sell it, couldn't trade her mother's memory for rent money. Except she could, because homelessness was worse than sentiment, and Mia needed insulin more than Elena needed jewelry. The pawn shop on Market Street offered $350. Elena negotiated to $425, accepted it with hands that shook, and walked out with cash and grief in equal proportions. $668 total now. Enough for rent. Nothing left for groceries or utilities or Mia's insulin prescription due for refill next week. But they have housing for another month, during which Elena would figure out the next impossible problem. Wednesday, Elena paid rent in person, counting out bills in Mr. Kowalski's office like she was surrendering siege terms. He provided a receipt with the grudging acknowledgement of landlords who'd expected default and were almost disappointed by timely payment. She walked out with $18 remaining. Mia's insulin cost $400. The prescription was due for refill Friday. Without it, Mia's blood sugar would become unmanageable within a week, and unmanaged diabetes killed in ways both quick and slow. Elena called Mia's endocrinologist, explained the situation with the calm of someone who'd done this before. They had a patient assistance program. Processing took 3 weeks. Could they expedite? The receptionist's sympathy was genuine, but useless. I'm sorry, Ms. Martinez. The program has specific protocols. 3 weeks is the minimum. My daughter will run out of insulin in 2 days. Can you pay out of pocket and seek reimbursement? I have $18. Silence on the line. The receptionist had heard this story before. Heard it often enough that she had a script. You could try the Emergency Assistance Program at Philadelphia General. They sometimes provide short-term insulin for patients in crisis. Crisis. That was the official term for too poor to afford the medication keeping your child alive. Elena thanked her, hung up, and added Philadelphia General to Thursday's agenda. Wednesday afternoon brought a call from Richard. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won over self-preservation. Elena, have you talked to anyone about Dad's work? Anyone from Westfield Industries? Her pulse spiked. Why? Because someone from the SEC contacted the company asking questions about Dad's files. They want access to his work computer, his desk, anything he left behind. What did they ask about specifically? They didn't say. Just that they're investigating potential irregularities and Dad's records might be relevant. Did Dad leave you anything besides the filing cabinet? Any documents, hard drives, anything? Elena's mind raced. Richard didn't know. Didn't know she'd submitted the complaint. Didn't know the filing cabinet had contained evidence instead of tax returns. Just the filing cabinet. Why? What do you think they're looking for? I don't know. But Westfield's corporate counsel called me. Said if I had any of Dad's work materials, I should retain a lawyer before talking to the SEC. Something about potential legal exposure. Legal exposure for what? He didn't specify. Just said Dad worked on sensitive accounts and the company needed to protect confidential information. Elena, did Dad ever mention anything about Westfield? Any problems at work? He never talked about work. You know that. He was private. Yeah. Richard's voice carried doubt he didn't quite voice. Look, if anyone from the SEC contacts you, don't talk to them without a lawyer. Seriously. Corporate investigations get complicated, and you don't want to accidentally say something that creates problems. Problems for who? For all of us. We're Dad's heirs. If there's legal trouble connected to his work, it could affect the estate. After Richard hung up, Elena sat processing what she'd learned. Westfield knew about the investigation. Their lawyers were already moving, already contacting her father's family, already trying to control information flow. And Richard was worried about legal exposure affecting the estate. Worried about his $180,000 portfolio and Veronica's $240,000 house. Neither of them knew Elena had filed a complaint. Neither knew the filing cabinet had been full of evidence instead of paperwork. Neither knew their father had spent 40 years documenting crimes that could destroy the company Richard was apparently now trying to protect. Thursday morning, Elena took Mia to Philadelphia General's Emergency Assistance Program. They waited 3 hours in a room designed for maximum bureaucratic despair. Plastic chairs, fluorescent lights, forms requiring documentation Elena didn't have. When her number was finally called, a tired social worker explained the process with the efficiency of someone who'd given this speech 10,000 times. We can provide emergency insulin for up to 30 days while you apply for long-term assistance. You'll need to document financial hardship, provide tax returns, bank statements, proof of income. Elena interrupted with the desperation of someone who'd navigated these systems before. I have all that. I can provide everything. But my daughter needs insulin now. Today. Her prescription runs out tomorrow. The emergency supply takes 24 to 48 hours to process. 48 hours means she goes 2 days without insulin. That's dangerous. I understand. But the program has protocols. Elena wanted to scream. Wanted to explain that protocols killed people, that bureaucracy had body counts, that her daughter's pancreas didn't care about processing times. Instead, she filled out forms, provided documentation, watched the social worker input information into a computer system that probably ran on hardware for 1987. You'll receive a call within 48 hours about approval. In the meantime, try to ration your current supply. Reduce dosages slightly if necessary. Reducing insulin dosages was dangerous, but apparently less dangerous than running out completely. They left with forms and promises and the particular rage of people navigating systems designed to help while actually creating obstacles. Mia was quiet on the bus ride home. Finally, she spoke with the careful tone of kids trying not to upset parents who were barely holding together. Mom, am I going to be okay? Yes, you're going to be fine. I promise. Promises were dangerous when you couldn't guarantee outcomes. But sometimes lies felt kinder than truth. Thursday afternoon, Elena's phone rang. Blocked number. She answered anyway because ignoring calls felt like ignoring tsunami warnings. Ms. Martinez? This is Jeffrey Brennan from Westfield Industries Corporate Counsel. Her blood turned to ice water. How did you get this number? Public records. Ms. Martinez, I'm calling regarding your father's employment with Westfield. We're conducting an internal review of accounting procedures, and we'd like to speak with you about any work materials Robert Martinez may have left behind. I don't have any work materials. My father left personal effects. That's all. Our understanding is that Robert maintained certain files. You have the wrong information. My father left a filing cabinet with old tax documents. Nothing work-related. Ms. Martinez, if you're in possession of confidential corporate documents, returning them voluntarily would be in your best interest. Westfield takes protection of proprietary information very seriously. The threat was subtle but clear. Give back the evidence or face consequences. I don't have corporate documents. I don't know what you're talking about. Your father worked for Westfield for 40 years. He had access to sensitive financial information. If any of that information found its way into external hands, say the SEC, that would constitute a serious breach of confidentiality agreements. My father's dead. He can't breach anything. But his heirs could. Ms. Martinez, I'm offering you an opportunity to resolve this cooperatively. If you have documents that belong to Westfield Industries, return them. We'll consider the matter closed. And if I don't have any documents, then you have nothing to worry about. But if documents appear during the SEC investigation and we discover you withheld corporate property, Westfield will pursue legal action for theft of confidential information. That could include criminal charges. Elena's hand gripped the phone hard enough to hurt. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining the legal reality. Corporate espionage is a federal crime. Theft of trade secrets carries significant penalties. If your father took documents that didn't belong to him, and you're using those documents to damage Westfield's reputation, this conversation is over. She hung up with shaking hands. They knew. Westfield knew she had evidence. Knew she'd reported them. Were already threatening legal action designed to terrify her into silence. Her father had been right to be scared. The Westfield family fought with lawyers and threats and the full weight of corporate resources against a single mother with $18 and a daughter who needed insulin. Elena called Agent Chen immediately. He answered on the second ring. Westfield's corporate counsel just called me. Threatened legal action for theft of corporate documents. Said if I don't return their files, they'll pursue criminal charges. Chen's voice went hard. What exactly did he say? Elena recounted the conversation as precisely as she could remember. Chen listened without interrupting. Ms. Martinez, this is witness intimidation. Federal offense. I'm going to need you to document everything. Time of call, what was said, any threats made. Don't take any more calls from Westfield or their lawyers. If they contact you again, refer them to me. He said I could face criminal charges for theft of confidential information. You can't. Whistleblower protections explicitly shield you from retaliation. Westfield knows that. They're trying to scare you into withdrawing your complaint. It's working. Don't let it. This is exactly why we have protection laws. Companies like Westfield count on intimidating whistleblowers into silence. Your father spent 40 years silent. You don't have to. After the call, Elena sat in her apartment, trying to feel brave and failing completely. Her father had been threatened, had stayed silent to protect his family. And now the same company was threatening Elena, and she had to decide whether to fight or surrender. Except surrendering wasn't really an option anymore. The SEC had the evidence. The investigation was proceeding. Withdrawing her complaint wouldn't make Westfield forgive her. It would just mean she'd given up the whistleblower protections while still being perceived as a threat. She was committed now. For better or worse, she'd chosen her father's path. Except instead of staying silent, she was fighting back. Friday brought the call from Philadelphia General. Mia's emergency insulin was approved. 30-day supply, available for pickup immediately. Elena took the bus to the hospital pharmacy, collected medication that cost $400 retail, and was being provided free because bureaucratic compassion occasionally existed and felt relief so intense it bordered on euphoria. Mia was safe for 30 days, after which they'd need to navigate the process again, assuming the long-term assistance program approved by then. One crisis solved. Approximately 8,000 remaining. That evening, Elena's phone buzzed with an email from Agent Williams. Subject line, Hardship Fund Application. She opened it with the hope of someone who'd learned not to expect good news, but couldn't help wanting it anyway. Ms. Martinez, your hardship fund application has been expedited due to documented financial distress and retaliation attempts by subjects of investigation. You've been approved for $10,000, which will be direct deposited within 5 to 7 business days. Additional information. The SEC investigation of Westfield Industries is proceeding rapidly. Initial review of your father's evidence suggests fraud totaling significantly more than initially estimated. We're coordinating with the Department of Justice for potential criminal charges. This is a strong case. Your father's documentation is exceptional. Thank you for coming forward. Agent Victoria Williams, $10,000. Arriving in a week. Enough for rent, groceries, utilities, insulin copays. Enough to breathe without drowning for the first time in 2 years. Elena read the email 3 times, then showed Mia, who squealed with delight that echoed through their small apartment. We're going to be okay, Mom. We're actually going to be okay. For now, the investigation still takes years. But we have time now. Time to figure out the rest. Time. The thing Elena had been running out of. The thing her father had spent 40 years wishing he had more of. And now, temporarily, impossibly, they had enough to survive until the next crisis. Saturday morning brought another call from Richard. Elena almost didn't answer, but curiosity and family obligation won over self-preservation. Elena, Westfield's lawyers contacted Veronica and me. They're asking about Dad's filing cabinet, specifically asking if we know what was in it. What did you tell them? The truth, that you took it, we didn't examine it, assumed it was personal paperwork. But Elena, they're offering money. $50,000 for information about Dad's files. They said if any of his work materials exist, they'd pay for their return, no questions asked. $50,000. A fortune to Elena 3 weeks ago. Meaningless now compared to potential whistleblower rewards worth millions. Did you take the money? No, but I'm thinking about it. $50,000 split 3 ways is still $16,000 each. That's real money for just telling them what we know about a filing cabinet. What do we know? That you have it. That's all we know. Elena, did Dad leave? Anything valuable in there? Anything worth this kind of money? Every instinct screamed at Elena to lie. To protect the evidence, protect herself, protect the investigation. But Richard was her brother. Flawed, privileged, sometimes cruel, but still family. Richard, if Westfield is offering money for Dad's files, it's because those files contain evidence they don't want public. Evidence that could destroy them. Dad spent 40 years documenting corporate fraud. The filing cabinet wasn't full of tax returns. It was full of proof that Westfield Industries has been stealing for decades. Silence on the line. Long enough that Elena checked to see if the call had dropped. Finally, Richard's voice came back, different than before. Quieter. You're serious. The SEC is investigating them. I filed a whistleblower complaint. Dad left me evidence worth potentially hundreds of millions in recovered funds. That's why they're offering $50,000 to make the evidence disappear. Jesus Christ, Elena. Did you know? Did you know what Dad was doing? No. I knew he was weird about his office. Knew he never talked about work. But I thought he was just private, not. Richard's voice cracked slightly. Not building a case against his employer for 40 years. He did it to protect us. They threatened Mom. Threatened us. Said we'd disappear if he ever reported them. And you decided to report them anyway? I decided Dad spent 40 years scared. I'm not going to waste his evidence by being a coward too. Another long silence. Then Richard spoke with something approximating respect, which Elena hadn't heard from him since they were children. Do you know what you're doing? Do you have lawyers? Protection? The SEC has whistleblower protection laws. Federal agents are handling the investigation. I'll be fine. Westfield has resources, money, connections. They'll fight dirty. They already are. Their lawyers call me Thursday. Threatened criminal charges for theft of corporate documents. That's witness intimidation. Federal crime. I know. The SEC is documenting everything. Richard exhaled heavily. Okay, what do you need from me? The question surprised her. What? You're fighting a corporate empire with federal protection that might not be enough. What do you need? Money? A place to stay if things get dangerous? Just tell me. Elena's throat tightened. Richard was offering help. Actual help, not condescension disguised as charity. I don't know yet, but thank you for offering. Dad left you that evidence for a reason. I thought he was being senile, leaving you furniture while Veronica and I got actual assets. But he knew what he was doing. He knew you'd fight. After they hung up, Elena sat processing the conversation. Richard had gone from dismissive to supportive in one phone call. Understanding that the filing cabinet represented their father's final act of courage had transformed how Richard saw both their father and Elena. Maybe family wasn't about who got what in the will. Maybe it was about who stood beside you when corporate lawyers started making threats. Sunday, Elena took Mia to church. Not because she was particularly religious, but because the community meal afterward meant free food and her grocery budget was non-existent until the hardship fund arrived. Father Murphy's homily was about courage in the face of fear, about choosing righteousness over comfort, about small acts of bravery accumulating into movements that changed the world. Elena wondered if he knew her story. Wondered if Agent Williams attended this church and had mentioned the whistleblower case to the priest who now seemed to be speaking directly to her. Or maybe courage was just universally relevant, and everyone in the congregation was fighting their own battles against their own Westfield industries. After the meal, Mia wanted to light a candle for Grandpa. They stood together in the quiet church, her daughter's small hand in hers, watching the flame flicker. "Do you think Grandpa's proud of us?" Mia's voice echoed slightly in the empty space. "I think he is. I think he's been proud the whole time. Just couldn't say it while he was alive. Because he was scared. But he still documented everything. Still built the case. Still left us the evidence. That's courage too. Doing what you can even when you can't do everything." They stood in silence, watching the candle burn. Somewhere in the church, organ music played softly. Somewhere in Philadelphia, federal agents were building a case against Westfield Industries. Somewhere in the universe, Robert Martinez was either watching his daughter continue his work or simply gone, his consciousness dissolved back into the void. Either way, Elena was choosing to believe he'd be proud. Monday morning, the hardship fund deposited. Elena checked her bank balance 3 times to confirm the numbers were real. $10,043. Her previous balance of $18, plus $10,000 from the SEC, plus a $25 birthday check from her aunt she'd forgotten to deposit. $10,000. More money than Elena had ever had in her account simultaneously. She paid utilities, bought groceries, real groceries, not just rice and beans, but fresh vegetables and meat and bread from the bakery instead of day-old clearance. Refilled Mia's prescriptions at full cost instead of waiting for assistance programs. Paid down credit cards enough to stop the threatening phone calls. For the first time in 2 years, Elena felt like she could breathe without calculating the oxygen cost. That evening, she took Mia to dinner. Nothing fancy, just a diner with booths and milkshakes and the kind of comfort food that made temporary poverty feel survivable. Mia ordered a burger with extra pickles and chocolate shake, her face glowing with the simple joy of choosing food instead of accepting what was affordable. "Mom, are we rich now?" "No, baby. We're solvent. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Rich means you don't worry about money. Solvent means you can pay this month's bills and maybe next month's. We're still one emergency away from trouble. But we're okay for now. We're okay for now." Mia considered this while chewing her burger. "That's better than we were last month." "Yeah, it's a lot better." Outside the diner, November Philadelphia glowed with early Christmas lights. People passed carrying shopping bags, their faces showing the universal stress of approaching holidays combined with economic uncertainty. Elena watched them and felt kinship. They were all just trying to survive, all choosing between competing priorities with insufficient resources, all hoping the next disaster would wait until they'd recovered from the previous one. But unlike most of them, Elena had evidence worth $334 million, had federal protection, had her father's courage finally manifesting through her actions instead of his silence. Tuesday brought an email from Agent Chun requesting an in-person meeting. Elena took the bus to the SEC's Philadelphia office, a glass building downtown that screamed federal authority. Chun and Williams met her in a conference room with city views and coffee that was significantly better than anything Elena could afford. "Ms. Martinez, we wanted to update you on the investigation's progress." Chun slid a folder across the table. "Your father's evidence is extraordinary. We've traced $334 million in fraudulent transactions spanning 40 years. The Department of Justice is filing criminal charges against Marcus Westfield Jr. and 6 other executives." Elena opened the folder. Inside, charging documents listing counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, witness tampering. Each count carried potential prison sentences measured in decades. Criminal charges mean prison time. If convicted, yes. Federal sentencing guidelines for this level of fraud typically result in 15 to 25 years. Marcus Westfield Jr. is 62. A conviction could mean he dies in prison. The satisfaction Elena felt was complicated. Marcus Westfield had threatened her father, had terrorized Robert Martinez for 40 years, deserved punishment. But prison for life felt harsh in ways Elena couldn't quite articulate. Williams seemed to read her expression. Ms. Martinez, this man threatened your family for 4 decades, stole hundreds of millions, used that money to buy influence, silence witnesses, ruin careers. He deserves what's coming. I know. It's just, my father spent his whole life scared of this man. And now I'm the one who destroyed him. Your father destroyed him. You just deliver the evidence. Chin pulled out another document. We also wanted to discuss the whistleblower reward. Based on current evidence, we estimate recovering at least $250 million through asset seizure and restitution. Your reward, calculated at the standard 15%, would be $37. $5 million. The number hit Elena like physical force. $37.5 million. She tried to conceptualize that amount. Couldn't. Her brain had no framework for understanding wealth measured in millions. How long until I receive that? 2 to 4 years. Criminal trial takes time. Asset seizure is complicated when defendants hide money offshore. But Ms. Martinez, this is happening. Your father gave you evidence that will result in the largest securities fraud conviction in Pennsylvania history. After the meeting, Elena walked to the bus stop in a daze. $37 million. Her father's final gift. His lifetime of documentation transformed into wealth that would change everything. Except it was still years away. And in the meantime, she was a single mother with $9,000 in the bank and a daughter who needed insulin monthly. The whistleblower reward was salvation. Eventually, someday, when the case concluded and assets were seized and bureaucracy finished its slow grinding process. Until then, she just had to survive. Wednesday morning, Elena woke to her phone ringing at 6:47 a.m. Unknown number. She answered with the reflexive dread of someone who'd learned that early morning calls meant emergencies or creditors, and both were equally unwelcome. Ms. Martinez, this is Dr. Sarah Patel from Philadelphia General. I'm calling about Mia's emergency insulin application. Elena's stomach dropped. Is something wrong? No, actually the opposite. I reviewed her case file, and I wanted to let you know that based on her medical history and your financial situation, Mia qualifies for our long-term pediatric assistance program. It covers all diabetes-related care, insulin, testing supplies, endocrinology appointments. No cost to you. The words took several seconds to penetrate. No cost. The program is grant-funded specifically for children with chronic conditions whose families can't afford treatment. Mia's already approved. I'm calling to schedule her first appointment under the new coverage. Elena sat up in bed, tears starting before her conscious mind had processed the relief. She's covered? All of it. All of it. As long as she remains under 18 and your income stays within program guidelines. Which, according to your application, shouldn't be an issue. They scheduled an appointment for the following week. After Dr. Patel hung up, Elena sat holding her phone, crying with the particular intensity of someone who'd been carrying impossible weight and had just been told they could set it down. Mia appeared in the doorway, hair sticking up in 12 directions, face creased with sleep. Mom, why are you crying? Your insulin is covered. All of it. For free. Until you're 18. Mia launched herself onto the bed, wrapping arms around Elena with the fierce joy of kids who understood exactly how much had just changed. They sat together, crying and laughing and holding each other while November morning light filtered through their apartment's single window. One crisis solved. Permanently. Not temporarily patched, with hardship funds or emergency programs requiring monthly reapplication, but actually solved with coverage lasting years. Elena felt something in her chest unclench. Something that had been tight since Mia's diagnosis 3 years ago. Since the first $400 insulin prescription, since the realization that her daughter's survival required money Elena would never reliably have. For the first time since diagnosis, Mia's diabetes felt manageable instead of catastrophic. That afternoon, Elena returned to substitute teaching. The assignment was 8th grade algebra at Northeast Middle, a school in a neighborhood that looked exactly like hers, struggling, poor, filled with kids who understood that the American dream was a story told to other people's children. The lesson plan involved quadratic equations, which Elena could teach in her sleep. She moved through the material with practiced efficiency, watching students either engage or disengage based on factors beyond her control. Home situations, learning disabilities, the bone-deep exhaustion of poverty that made concentrating on math feel impossibly frivolous. During lunch, she sat in the teacher's lounge with other substitutes, a rotating cast of people trying to survive on $90 per day while hoping for permanent positions that never materialized. Marcus, a 28-year-old with a master's in education, was complaining about student loan payments. I owe $87,000 for a degree that qualifies me to make $35,000 annually if I'm lucky enough to get hired full-time. The math doesn't math. Elena almost told him about the whistleblower case. Almost explained that she was sitting on evidence worth $37. $5 million in eventual rewards. Almost shared that her father had documented corporate fraud for 40 years and left her the key to financial salvation. But Agent Chen had been clear. Don't discuss the case. Whistleblower identity was confidential. Talking created risks. Word spreading, Westfield discovering her identity through social engineering, protection protocols failing. So she said nothing. Just listened to Marcus complain about debt she also carried, about systems that crush people methodically, about the casual cruelty of economies that required education but didn't pay for it. After school, Elena stopped at the library, the main branch downtown with computers, internet, and databases she couldn't access from home. She needed to research whistleblower cases, understand what came next, prepare for battles she knew were coming. The case files she found painted complicated pictures. Whistleblowers who won millions after years of legal fighting. Whistleblowers who lost everything, jobs, marriages, mental health, before cases concluded. Success rates hovered around 60%, which meant 40% of people who came forward with evidence watched their cases collapse and their lives implode for nothing. One case particularly caught her attention. David Morrison versus Pharmaceutical Corp., 2015. Morrison had documented drug pricing fraud, filed SEC complaint, endured 4 years of legal battles while the company systematically destroyed his reputation. They'd planted false evidence of embezzlement, convinced prosecutors Morrison was the real criminal, gotten him arrested and charged with felony fraud. It took 2 years to clear his name. By then, his marriage had collapsed, his kids wouldn't speak to him, his career was destroyed. Eventually, the pharmaceutical company was convicted and Morrison received his whistleblower reward, $23 million. But the article Elena read quoted him saying, "I'd give back every penny to have those 6 years of my life back. To have my family back. Money doesn't fix what they broke." Elena closed the browser feeling cold despite the library's overheated air. Morrison's case was a warning. Companies fought dirty. They had resources to destroy lives, plant evidence, turn victims into villains. Was she ready for that? Was she prepared to have her life systematically dismantled while waiting for justice that might never arrive? Her phone buzzed. Text from Agent Williams. "Can you call me when you have privacy?" Elena stepped outside into November cold that matched her internal temperature. Dialed Williams' number. "Ms. Martinez, I wanted to give you a heads up. Westfield's legal team filed a motion attempting to block the investigation. They're claiming your father's documents are privileged attorney-client communications and can't be used as evidence." That's not true. Dad was an accountant, not a lawyer. We know. It's a stalling tactic. The motion will be denied, but it indicates how aggressively they plan to fight. They're also subpoenaing your father's estate records, trying to establish whether he had legal authority to remove corporate documents. He worked there 40 years. They were his files. Legally, it's complicated. Employment contracts often specify that work product belongs to employers. Westfield will argue your father stole proprietary information. So what do I do? Nothing. Let us handle it. But Elena, William's voice softened slightly. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Westfield knows they're facing criminal charges. They'll use every tool available to discredit the evidence and the witness. Meaning me, meaning you. They'll investigate your background, look for anything they can use. Bankruptcies, arrests, anything that makes you look unreliable. Have you ever been arrested? No. Drug use? Even recreational? No. Financial crimes? Even minor things like bounce checks? Some bounce checks from when I was really broke. Nothing intentional. They'll use it, paint you as financially irresponsible, suggest you're fabricating evidence for money. It won't work. The documentary evidence speaks for itself, but they'll try. After the call, Elena walked to the bus stop feeling the weight of what was coming. Westfield would investigate her, would dig through her life looking for ammunition, would try to transform her from whistleblower to criminal. And there was plenty to find. 2 years of financial struggle meant 2 years of mistakes. Bounce checks, late payments, credit card defaults, electricity shut-off notices. None of it criminal, all of it embarrassing. All of it potentially useful for lawyers trying to paint her as a desperate woman fabricating evidence for money. The bus ride home took 40 minutes, enough time for Elena to cycle through every poor decision she'd made in the past 2 years. Every time she'd overdraft her account. Every payment missed because Mia's insulin took priority. Every creditor call ignored because talking to people about money she didn't have felt pointless. She thought she was just surviving. Turns out she'd been creating a paper trail that corporate lawyers would use to destroy her credibility. At home, Mia was doing homework at their kitchen table. Math problems, ironically. Quadratic equations identical to what Elena had taught that afternoon. "Mom, can you help? I don't understand this one." Elena sat beside her daughter, examining the problem. Standard quadratic, solvable through factoring or the quadratic formula. She walked Mia through it step by step, watching understanding dawn in her daughter's eyes. "Oh, I get it now. Thanks, Mom. You're good at this. Better than most 8th graders." Grandpa said I had his math brain. Remember? He said the Martinez family understands numbers in ways other people don't. Elena remembered. Her father sitting at this same table years ago, helping her with calculus, explaining that mathematics was just patterns made visible. That if you learned to see the patterns, everything else became simple. He'd been right. Mathematics was patterns. And corporate fraud was just mathematics applied to theft, patterns of transactions designed to hide stolen money in plain sight. Her father had seen the patterns, had documented them with mathematical precision. And now Elena was using his work to bring down the people who'd terrorized him for 40 years. She looked at Mia, bent over homework, tongue poking out in concentration the same way Elena's father had when he worked. 3 generations of Martinez mathematicians, connected by genetics and competence, and the particular curse of seeing patterns other people missed. Thursday brought another call from Richard. Westfield investigators came to my office. Asked about Dad, about his relationship with you, about whether he'd seemed paranoid toward the end. What did you tell them? The truth, that Dad was always private. I didn't know what he was working on. His relationship with you was fine. But Elena, they weren't just asking questions. They were building a narrative, trying to suggest Dad was senile, maybe paranoid, that his evidence is just the confused records of a man losing his mental capacity. Rage hit Elena so hard she saw stars. Dad was not senile. He was meticulous until the day he died. They're lying to discredit him because his evidence is perfect and they can't refute it. I know that. You know that. But Westfield's going to argue in court. They'll find his doctor, get medical records, try to establish diminished capacity. His doctor will say he was fine. His doctor will say he had heart problems and was on medication. Westfield will hire medical experts to testify that heart medication can cause confusion. They'll create reasonable doubt. This is witness intimidation. They can't. They can. They are. Elena, these people have unlimited resources and no ethics. They'll do whatever it takes to avoid conviction. After Richard hung up, Elena called Agent Shun and reported the conversation. He listened with the patient silence of someone who'd expected exactly this. Westfield's defense strategy is predictable. Discredit the witness, claim evidence was obtained improperly, argue your father was mentally incompetent. None of it will work. Documentary evidence doesn't require witness testimony to be valid. The numbers speak for themselves, but they're going to try anyway. Of course, it's their only play. But Elena, your father was an accountant for 40 years. His records are professional grade. No judge is going to accept that a man maintained perfect documentation while suffering dementia severe enough to fabricate evidence. I hope you're right. I am. Trust the process. Trust your father's work. That weekend, Elena took Mia to visit her father's grave. The cemetery was quiet, November bare trees creating skeletal patterns against gray sky. Robert Martinez's headstone was simple granite, his name and dates, no epitaph because Elena couldn't afford extra engraving. She placed flowers, cheap ones from the grocery store, but real flowers, not plastic, and stood with Mia in silence. "Grandpa would be proud of you," Mia said quietly. "I don't know. I'm scared all the time." He was scared too, but at least he stayed quiet. "I'm fighting people who destroyed him." "But you're fighting. That's different than hiding." Elena pulled Mia closer. "Your grandfather spent 40 years hiding because he was protecting us. I don't know if fighting is brave or just reckless. You're doing what he wanted. His letter said to use the evidence. You're using it." They stood in silence while wind moved through bare branches overhead. Other families visited other graves. Mothers, fathers, children lost to age and disease and accidents. The democracy of death didn't care about corporate fraud or whistleblower cases or the particular way fear poisoned lives. "Dad, I hope I'm doing this right," Elena whispered to the granite stone. "I hope 40 years of evidence is enough. I hope I'm brave enough to see this through." The stone didn't answer. Dead people never did. But somewhere in Elena's chest, something that felt like her father's voice said, "You're doing fine. Keep going." Monday morning brought certified mail. Elena signed for the thick envelope with official seals and the return address of Westfield Industries Legal Department. Inside, a lawsuit. Civil action against Elena Martinez for theft of corporate property, breach of confidentiality, and tortious interference with business relations. They were suing her for $10 million in damages. Elena read the complaint 3 times, each word settling into her stomach like stones. Westfield was suing her personally, claiming she'd stolen their documents, violated her father's employment contract, damaged their business reputation by filing false SEC complaints. The lawsuit was strategically timed, filed in state court where SEC whistleblower protections might not apply, designed to drain her resources fighting civil litigation while the criminal case proceeded. She called Agent Williams immediately. "They're suing me. $10 million. They say I stole corporate documents. Forward me the complaint. The SEC will file a motion to intervene. This is textbook retaliation against a protected whistleblower. The lawsuit will be dismissed." How long until it's dismissed? Months. Maybe a year. But Elena, they don't expect to win. They expect to scare you, to make you spend money on lawyers, lose sleep over depositions, feel the pressure of litigation. It's psychological warfare. It's working. Don't let it. The case is frivolous. You're protected by federal law. Westfield's lawyers know this will be dismissed. They filed anyway because the process itself is punishment. After the call, Elena sat holding the lawsuit, feeling the weight of paper that represented corporate power wielded against a single mother with $8,000 in the bank and no legal training. She needed a lawyer. SEC whistleblower protections covered the federal investigation, but this civil suit required separate representation. Lawyers cost money she didn't have, even with the hardship fund. That evening, Elena researched whistleblower defense attorneys, found firms that specialized in retaliation cases, worked on contingency, took payment from eventual settlements. She made appointments with 3 different lawyers for the following week. Tuesday brought a different kind of assault. An article appeared in the Philadelphia Business Journal. Disgruntled air files questionable fraud claims against Westfield Industries. The article painted Elena as a desperate woman who'd inherited nothing valuable and fabricated evidence to extort money from a respected local company. It quoted unnamed sources saying Robert Martinez had been increasingly confused in his final years, and suggesting his documents were the paranoid fantasies of a man suffering cognitive decline. It mentioned Elena's financial struggles, her substitute teaching income, her daughter's medical bills. Painted a picture of someone so desperate for money that she'd invent corporate fraud. The article never used her name, just referred to her as the whistleblower in ways that made it clear who they meant. Anyone who knew Elena, knew her father, knew about the estate distribution, would immediately identify her. By Wednesday, her phone was ringing constantly. Journalists wanting comments. Former colleagues asking if it was true she'd accused Westfield of fraud. Friends offering awkward support that felt more like morbid curiosity. Elena stopped answering calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Let voicemail collect messages she'd probably never return. Felt her life shrinking into siege mentality. Her apartment, Mia. Work, nothing else. Mia came home from school, crying Wednesday afternoon. Kids were asking if you're the person who's trying to destroy Westfield Industries. They said their parents said you're lying for money. Elena pulled her daughter close, feeling rage at Westfield for weaponizing middle school social dynamics. I'm not lying. Grandpa documented real crimes. I reported them because it's the right thing to do. Why don't you just tell everyone that? Because the law says whistleblower identity stays confidential. I can't publicly confirm or deny anything without violating protection protocols. So you just let people think you're bad? For now. Eventually the truth comes out. Eventually we win. But right now we just survive. Thursday, Elena met with her first potential attorney. Marcus Chun, no relation to Agent Chun, practiced whistleblower defense from a small office in Center City. He was 50-something, tired-looking, wearing a suit that had seen better decades. He reviewed Westfield's lawsuit with the weary competence of someone who'd seen this playbook before. Classic slap suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. They're suing to silence you, not because they expect to win. Pennsylvania has anti-slap laws that should get this dismissed within 6 months. 6 months of litigation? Unfortunately, they'll drag out discovery, file frivolous motions, generally make your life hell while the case proceeds. Then when the judge dismisses it, they'll appeal. Could take a year total. Can I countersue for legal fees? You can. Probably won't collect. Corporations have ways of making judgments uncollectible. But it sends a message. He quoted his fees. $15,000 retainer, $350 per hour after that. Estimated total cost of $40,000 to $60,000 to defend through dismissal and appeal. Elena had $8,000. The gap between what she had and what she needed felt insurmountable. I can't afford that. Most whistleblowers can't. That's why slap suits work. The process is the punishment. Can you qualify for legal aid? My income's too high for legal aid, too low for private attorneys. Welcome to the American justice system. Chin's smile was sympathetic but useless. There are whistleblower defense funds, nonprofit organizations that cover legal costs for retaliation cases. I can help you apply, but approval takes months. And in the meantime, you represent yourself or find a lawyer willing to work on contingency, which, given that slap suits don't generate monetary damages, is unlikely. Elena left his office feeling the full weight of what Westfield was doing. They filed a lawsuit they knew would fail, specifically because defending it would bankrupt her. The process was designed to punish, and it was working. The second attorney she met with Friday was more encouraging. Jessica Reeves practiced from a larger firm, specialized in whistleblower retaliation, had successfully defended 3 cases against corporate slap suits. I'll take this on contingency with conditions. If you win your SEC whistleblower reward, my firm gets 15% of the total. If the reward is as large as you're suggesting, $30 million plus, our cut covers the cost of defending you now. And if I lose, you won't. Federal whistleblower protections are strong. The SEC case is solid. You'll get your reward eventually. The question is whether you can survive the gap between now and then. Reeves laid out a strategy. File anti-slap motion immediately. Motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim. Motion for sanctions against Westfield for filing frivolous litigation. Aggressive defense designed to make continuing the lawsuit more expensive for them than dropping it. This is war, Reeves said bluntly. Westfield wants you to give up. We're going to make them regret filing. Elena signed the retainer agreement with hands that only shook slightly. She was committed now to a legal battle that would define the next several years of her life. Fighting a corporation with unlimited resources while trying to survive on substitute teaching income and rapidly depleting hardship funds. That weekend, Elena tried to maintain normalcy for Mia's sake. They went to the library, checked out books neither of them had time to read, visited the park even though November cold made outdoor activities uncomfortable, pretended their lives weren't imploding under the weight of litigation and media attention and corporate retaliation. Sunday evening, Elena's phone rang. "Richard, I saw the Business Journal article. Westfield's playing dirty. They're destroying me. The lawsuit, the media, everything. I can't afford to fight this, Richard. How much do you need?" The question surprised her. "What? For legal fees. How much do you need to defend the lawsuit?" "My attorney's working on contingency. But I need to survive until the whistleblower reward comes through. Could be years. I have $8,000 left from the hardship fund. That's maybe 3 months of living expenses." Silence on the line. Then Richard's voice came back different, decisive. "I'm selling some of Dad's portfolio. Going to liquidate $50,000 worth of stocks. You'll get half, $25,000. That's enough for 6 months. Maybe more if you're careful." "Richard, I can't." "Yes, you can. Dad left me the portfolio because he thought I needed financial assets. But he left you the evidence because he knew you'd fight. I'm using my inheritance to help you use yours." That's what he would have wanted. Elena's throat constricted. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you're right. Dad spent 40 years scared, and Westfield destroyed him anyway. They threatened our family, stole from thousands of people, and got rich doing it. You're the only one brave enough to fight back. The least I can do is make sure you don't starve while fighting." They talked logistics, how long to liquidate stocks, how to transfer money, tax implications Elena hadn't considered. When they hung up, Elena sat crying with relief, so intense it felt like physical pain. Richard was helping, not from obligation or guilt, but from genuine belief that what she was doing mattered. Family wasn't about who got what in the will. It was about who stood beside you when corporate lawyers attacked. The $25,000 arrived in Elena's account Wednesday. Combined with her remaining hardship funds, she had approximately $32,000. Enough for 8 months if she was careful, maybe a year if she was ruthlessly frugal. It felt like breathing room. Not security, but enough space to think past immediate survival. Thursday, Jessica Reeves filed their response to Westfield's lawsuit. The counterclaims were aggressive: abuse of process, malicious prosecution, violation of federal whistleblower protection laws. They demanded dismissal with prejudice, legal fees, and sanctions. Westfield's response came within a week. A motion to strike the counterclaims and discovery demands so extensive they'd require months to fulfill. Lists of documents requested, depositions scheduled, interrogatories numbering in the hundreds. Reeves called it a discovery blizzard, an intentional attempt to overwhelm with paperwork. They're requesting 40 years of your financial records. Every bank statement, credit card bill, tax return. They want to depose you for 5 days. They want to question Mia. They want to question my 12-year-old daughter. It's intimidation. They know I'll file a protective order preventing it. But they ask anyway to scare you. The discovery process consumed November and December. Elena spent evenings gathering documents. Tax returns from years when she'd actually filed on time, bank statements showing the slow deterioration of her finances, credit card bills documenting medical expenses and grocery purchases, and the particular poverty of trying to survive on. Substitute teacher income. Each document felt like exposure, like stripping naked in front of strangers who would judge every poor decision, every overdraft fee, every late payment. But Reeves had been clear. They'll see everything eventually. Better to provide it voluntarily than force them to subpoena it. Christmas arrived with Elena too exhausted for celebration. They bought a small tree from the lot selling leftovers for $10. Decorated it with ornaments Mia had made in school, paper snowflakes, and popcorn garlands and construction paper chains. Elena had budgeted $100 for presents. Got Mia new books, art supplies, a winter coat from the clearance rack that was warm, if not stylish. Mia gave Elena a framed picture she'd drawn. Elena and Mia and Grandpa Robert, all three of them smiling, surrounded by papers labeled evidence and flowers labeled justice. The artistic execution was questionable, but the sentiment was perfect. "It's us winning," Mia explained. "Grandpa's there because he's part of it, even though he's dead." Elena hung it on the refrigerator next to Mia's school papers and medical appointment reminders and the particular debris of single parenthood. New Year's arrived with Elena making resolutions she couldn't keep: save more money, stress less, somehow survive corporate litigation while maintaining employment and sanity. The usual impossible promises people made when January felt like fresh starts instead of continuations of December's problems. January brought Elena's deposition. 5 days of questioning in a conference room downtown, Westfield's attorneys across the table, court reporter documenting every word. They asked about her finances, her relationship with her father, her motivations for filing the SEC complaint. Asked the same questions 17 different ways, trying to catch inconsistencies that didn't exist. "Ms. Martinez, isn't it true that you were facing eviction when you filed the whistleblower complaint?" "I was behind on rent, yes." "And isn't it true that the SEC Hardship Fund provided you $10,000 shortly after filing?" "Yes." "So you filed a false fraud complaint to access emergency funds?" "No. I filed a legitimate complaint documenting corporate crimes my father spent 40 years recording." "But you received money as a result." "I received hardship assistance available to all whistleblowers in active investigations who can demonstrate financial need." Around and around, the same implications delivered different ways. That she'd fabricated evidence for money. That her father had been senile. That the whole case was a shakedown of a legitimate company by a desperate woman. By day 3, Elena wanted to scream. By day 5, she was too exhausted to care. Reeves had prepared her well. Stick to facts, don't speculate, don't get emotional. Elena followed the script, watching Westfield's attorneys grow visibly frustrated that she wouldn't break. February brought motion hearings. Westfield's motion to dismiss Elena's counterclaims. Elena's anti-SLAPP motion to dismiss Westfield's entire lawsuit. The judge, Honorable Patricia Morrison, 60-something, former prosecutor, reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, heard arguments with the patience of someone who'd seen corporate abuse disguised as legitimate litigation too many times. Westfield's attorney argued that Elena had stolen confidential documents, violated her father's employment agreements, damaged their business through false allegations. Reeves countered that federal whistleblower protections explicitly shielded Elena from retaliation, that Westfield's lawsuit was a transparent attempt to punish protected activity, that every claim failed as a matter of law. Judge Morrison asked pointed questions that suggested she'd already reached conclusions. "Counsel, your client filed this lawsuit 3 weeks after the SEC notified them of an investigation. That timing seems designed to intimidate the whistleblower rather than address legitimate claims." Westfield's attorney stammered through a response that convinced no one. The ruling came 2 weeks later. Westfield's lawsuit dismissed with prejudice. Elena's counterclaims allowed to proceed. The judge's written opinion was scathing, calling Westfield's suit a textbook example of SLAPP litigation designed to silence constitutionally protected activity, and awarding Elena $50,000 in legal fees to be paid by Westfield. Reeves called with the news. "We won. Complete victory. They can appeal, but they won't. The opinion is too strong. You're free." Elena sat in her apartment, holding her phone, feeling relief that didn't quite feel real. The civil lawsuit was over. Westfield had lost. She'd survived their attempt to bankrupt and intimidate her into silence. But the criminal case was still proceeding. The SEC investigation was ongoing. Years remained before resolution, before whistleblower rewards, before anything approaching actual closure. She'd won a battle. The war continued. March brought spring to Philadelphia with the tentative warmth of winter admitting defeat. Elena returned to substitute teaching, found an assignment becoming semi-regular at Northeast Middle. 3 days a week teaching algebra to 8th graders who mostly didn't care about quadratic equations, but occasionally surprised her with competence. The $50,000 from Westfield covered legal fees and left Elena with a small surplus. Combined with Richard's $25,000 and her careful budgeting, she had approximately $40,000 in savings. More money than she'd ever had, still a fraction of what she'd receive eventually if the SEC case succeeded. April brought her father's birthday. Elena and Mia visited the cemetery with flowers. Real ones this time, expensive lilies from the florist because Elena could afford small extravagances now. They stood by his grave in spring sunshine, both thinking about the man who'd spent 40 years documenting crimes while being too scared to report them. He'd be proud, Mia said quietly. You fought. He wanted you to fight. I hope so. I hope this was worth it. The lawsuit's dismissed. Westfield's going to trial. The evidence is solid. It was worth it. Elena wanted to believe that. Wanted to trust that the years of struggle ahead would result in justice, in vindication, in her father's sacrifice meaning something beyond fear and silence. But standing in the cemetery, surrounded by evidence that everyone died regardless of whether they fought or surrendered, Elena wondered if courage was its own reward or just another form of suffering painted in noble colors. May brought news from Agent Shun. Marcus Westfield Jr.'s criminal trial was scheduled for September. 6 months away. The trial would last weeks, involve hundreds of witnesses, present 40 years of evidence in a case the Justice Department was calling the largest corporate fraud prosecution in Pennsylvania history. Elena would have to testify, would have to sit on a witness stand and answer questions about her father, his evidence, her decision to come forward. Would have to face Marcus Westfield in court and explain how his threats had terrorized her family for decades. The thought terrified her, but refusing wasn't an option. The case required her testimony. The evidence required a human voice to explain what Robert Martinez had documented and why it mattered. June brought Mia's 13th birthday. Elena threw a small party, 6 friends from school, pizza, cake from the bakery that actually charged reasonable prices. Mia wore a dress she'd picked out herself, her face glowing with teenage excitement about becoming officially not a child anymore. Watching her daughter laugh with friends, Elena felt the weight of what she'd chosen. Mia's childhood had been defined by poverty and struggle and medical crises requiring constant vigilance. But it had also been defined by love and fierce protection and a mother who fought impossible battles to give her daughter chances she'd never had. The whistleblower case was about money, about justice, about holding powerful people accountable for crimes they'd committed with impunity. But it was also about Mia, about building a future where 13-year-old girls could celebrate birthdays without their mothers calculating insulin costs against party budgets. July brought preparation for trial testimony. Reeves helping, meaning drilling Elena for hours on potential questions, challenging every answer, making her practice staying calm under hostile cross-examination. Westfield's attorney will try to rattle you. They'll ask about your finances, your relationship with your father, any mistake you've ever made. Stay calm. Stick to facts. Don't let them make you angry. They practiced in Reeves' conference room. Elena sitting in the witness chair, answering questions about her father's evidence until the words felt automatic. August arrived with Elena's anxiety building towards September's trial. She'd taken leave from substitute teaching, couldn't focus on algebra when her entire future depended on testimony she'd give in federal court. The case had consumed 2 years of her life. 2 years of litigation, investigation, discovery, motion practice, depositions. 2 years of Westfield fighting with every resource available, trying to discredit evidence that spoke for itself. Her father had spent 40 years building the case. Elena had spent 2 years defending it. And in September, a jury would decide whether decades of documentation constituted proof beyond reasonable doubt that Marcus Westfield and his executives had stolen $334 million. September 12th. The trial began. Federal courthouse downtown, massive and intimidating, designed to make people feel small in the presence of justice. Elena sat in the gallery watching jury selection, 12 citizens who would determine whether her father's lifetime of work meant anything. The prosecution's opening statement laid out the case methodically. 40 years of fraud, $334 million stolen, systematic witness intimidation, corporate conspiracy to steal from shareholders and employees. Robert Martinez's documentation formed the backbone, meticulous records that tracked every fraudulent transaction. Westfield's defense opened with predictable strategy. Robert Martinez had been confused, his records unreliable. The transactions were legitimate business, expenses misunderstood by a man suffering cognitive decline. Elena was a desperate woman fabricating significance from mundane paperwork to access whistleblower rewards. The trial lasted 6 weeks. 43 witnesses, thousands of documents, forensic accountants explaining transaction flows, former Westfield employees testifying about intimidation, FBI agents describing the investigation process. Elena testified on week 4, took the witness stand with hands shaking, swore to tell the truth, faced the jury who would decide her fate. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Morrison, no relation to the judge, walked her through the evidence gently. How she found the filing cabinet, how she discovered her father's documentation, why she decided to come forward. Ms. Martinez, why did you report this to the SEC? Because my father spent 40 years too scared to report crimes he documented. I wasn't going to let his work be wasted because I was also a coward. Westfield's attorney, Jonathan Price, 50-something, expensive suit, aggressive demeanor, came at cross-examination like she'd personally attacked him. Ms. Martinez, isn't it true you were facing eviction when you filed this complaint? I was behind on rent, yes. And isn't it true you stand to gain millions if this case succeeds? I stand to receive a whistleblower reward if the evidence proves fraud. Yes. So you have significant financial motivation to fabricate evidence. I have significant financial motivation to ensure legitimate evidence is properly examined. I didn't fabricate anything. I reported what my father documented. Around and around, Price trying to paint her as mercenary. Elena staying calm, sticking to facts, refusing to be provoked into emotional responses that would undermine credibility. By the time cross-examination concluded, Elena was exhausted but intact. She'd survived, hadn't broken, hadn't given Westfield's attorneys ammunition to discredit her testimony. The trial concluded October 28th. Jury deliberations lasted 3 days, long enough to make Elena terrified they were deadlocked, short enough to suggest they'd actually examine the evidence rather than immediately deciding. November 1st, the verdict, guilty on all counts. Marcus Westfield Jr. convicted of securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, witness tampering, facing 25 to 30 years in federal prison. Elena sat in the courtroom listening to the verdict, feeling something between vindication and exhaustion. They'd won, actually won. 2 years of fighting, and justice had prevailed. Mia squeezed her hand. Richard sat on her other side, his face showing emotion Elena rarely saw, pride mixed with grief for their father who hadn't lived to see this moment. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Elena had prepared a statement with Reeves' help. My father, Robert Martinez, spent 40 years documenting crimes at Westfield Industries. He stayed silent because he was threatened, because he feared for his family's safety. I came forward because his evidence deserved to be heard. Today, justice was served. Corporate criminals will be held accountable. And my father's courage, even in silence, has been vindicated. The questions came rapid fire. How did it feel? What came next? How much money would she receive? Elena declined to answer specifics. Let Reeves handle the legal questions, escaped to a car waiting at the curb. That evening, Elena, Mia, Richard, and Veronica, who'd appeared at some point during the trial, quietly supportive, gathered at Elena's apartment for celebration that felt more like relief than joy. Dad would be proud, Veronica said quietly. She'd been distant during most of the process, but the verdict had brought her back. He spent his whole life scared. You weren't. I was terrified every day, but you fought anyway. That's the difference. They toasted with cheap wine and apple juice for Mia, talked about their father, about memories previously buried under resentment and distance, about the man who'd been quiet and strange, but had loved them enough to document crimes for 40 years while protecting them from consequences. The sentencing hearing happened December 15th. Marcus Westfield Jr. stood before Judge Morrison, his face showing the particular defeat of powerful people learning their power had limits. The judge sentenced him to 28 years in federal prison. At 62, Westfield would be 90 when released, effectively a life sentence. Mr. Westfield, you stole $334 million from shareholders, employees, and the public trust. You threatened witnesses and intimidated anyone who questioned your conduct. You used your wealth and position to believe yourself above the law. This sentence reflects the severity of your crimes and the necessity of deterrence. Corporate executives must understand that fraud carries consequences. Asset forfeiture proceedings would recover approximately $280 million. Offshore accounts seized, properties confiscated, investments liquidated. The money would go to victims, to restitution funds, to repairing damage Westfield had caused over 40 years. And Elena's whistleblower reward, calculated at 15% of recovered funds, $42 million. The number hit like lightning. $42 million. More money than Elena could conceptualize. More than her father had earned in his entire lifetime. More than generational wealth. Enough to transform not just Elena's life, but Mia's future and possibly her children's futures. The reward payment would arrive within 6 months, pending final asset recovery. January 2027, Elena sat in the apartment that had witnessed 2 years of struggle, looking at the letter from the SEC confirming her whistleblower reward, $42 million, to be paid in 4 installments over 12 months. Mia read over her shoulder. That's real? Actually real? It's real. They'd won. Actually won. The case that had consumed years, that had nearly destroyed them, that had tested every assumption about courage and fear in doing the right thing when the cost felt unbearable. Elena thought about her father, about Robert Martinez spending 40 years documenting crimes while living in fear, about the filing cabinet that had looked like worthless furniture but contained evidence worth millions, about courage that looked like silence but was actually strategic patience. She thought about Richard and Veronica, about siblings who dismissed her inheritance as joke until understanding transformed dismissal into respect, about family bonds rebuilt through shared understanding of what their father had sacrificed. She thought about Mia, 13 years old, brilliant and brave, who'd submitted a whistleblower complaint without permission and started the chain of events that led here. And she thought about the future, the one her father had died trying to give her, the one she'd fought impossible battles to reach, the one that started now with resources to build something meaningful. The first installment arrived February 14th, $10. $5 million deposited into Elena's bank account with the casual efficiency of electronic transfers that didn't care about the magnitude of change they represented. Elena bought a house first. Nothing ostentatious, just a 3-bedroom in a good school district where Mia could finish high school without worrying about eviction or broken radiators. Bought it outright. No mortgage, the feeling of owning property without debt, so foreign Elena kept checking to confirm it was real. She established a trust fund for Mia's education, $2 million, enough for any college plus graduate school plus whatever came after. Paid off student loans, credit card debt, medical bills. Donated $1 million to Philadelphia General's pediatric diabetes program that had saved Mia's life. Established the Robert Martinez Whistleblower Defense Fund, $5 million endowment to provide legal support for people who came forward with evidence of corporate crimes. Named after her father, ensuring his courage would help others fight battles he'd been too scared to fight himself. The remaining money, approximately $28 million after taxes, purchases, donations, sat in accounts earning interest while Elena figured out what came next. She quit substitute teaching, took time to breathe, to sleep past 6 a.m., to not calculate every purchase against survival budgets. Learned to live without the constant anxiety that had defined her adult life. Mia thrived, made friends at her new school, joined mathletes and robotics club, talked about college with the assumption that cost wasn't an obstacle, assumption that still felt surreal to Elena but was beautiful in its simplicity. Richard visited monthly. Veronica hosted family dinners at her house where they talked about their father without the weight of unsaid resentments. They'd all inherited money, but Elena had inherited meaning. The difference mattered. Spring arrived again. 2 years since the verdict. 3 years since Elena had found the filing cabinet. She visited her father's grave, brought flowers, sat in grass that had grown green with April warmth. "We did it, Dad. Your evidence convicted them. The money's being used to help people. Me is safe. I'm safe. You can rest now." The stone didn't answer. Dead people never did. But somewhere in Elena's chest, something that felt like her father's voice said, "You were always braver than I was. I'm proud of you." Elena sat in the cemetery, surrounded by evidence that everyone died, but not everyone mattered, and felt the particular peace of knowing her father's life had meant something beyond fear. He documented crimes for 40 years, stayed silent to protect his family, left evidence for a daughter brave enough to use it. And she had. She'd fought corporate power, survived litigation and intimidation, testified in court against people who destroyed her father through threats. She'd won. More importantly, she'd honored her father's lifetime of silent resistance by making it loud, making it matter, making it change something beyond his own terror. Sometimes inheritance wasn't about money. Sometimes it was about courage passed down through filing cabinets and meticulous documentation and letters saying, "Trust what you find." Elena had trusted, had found evidence, had used it to build justice from her father's fear. And sitting in spring sunshine by his grave, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just survival, but actual hope for futures built from past courage. The filing cabinet had looked worthless, had contained everything, had transformed her life through her father's final gift, the chance to be brave when he couldn't be. She'd taken that chance, had made it matter, and that finally was enough. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.